Welcome to the Family Bible Journey. Whether you're a first-time listener, one of our regulars, or one of those who is committed to either reading through or journaling through the Bible with us, thanks for listening. This is episode 292, season 1 of the Family Bible Journey Old Testament podcast. Today we're looking at Job chapter 22. The title of today's podcast is Earthly or Eternal Hopes? And our key verses for today are chapter 22, verses 21 to 30, where we read, Eliphaz spoke, "Agree with God and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. Receive instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. If you will return to the Almighty, you will be built up. If you remove injustice far from your tents. If you lay gold in the dust, the gold of Ophir among the stones of the torrent bed, then the Almighty will be your gold and your precious silver. Then you will delight yourself in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. You will make your prayer to him, and he will hear you, and you will pay your vows. You will decide on a matter, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on your ways. For when they are humbled, you say, it is because of pride. But he saves the lowly. He delivers even the one who is not innocent, who will be delivered through the cleanness of your hands. This is the word of the Lord." So in this speech, Eliphaz continues to discount Job's insistence that he is a righteous man, that he suffers for no fault of his own. And Eliphaz then goes on to speak as if earthly wisdom is the wisdom of God. And earlier in chapter 22, Eliphaz says some things that are correct. He talks about none being righteous in God's sight, which is something that we would certainly agree with. But in verses 5 and 6, he accuses Job of doing something in particular that warrants God's incredible wrath. He says, "Is not your evil abundant? There is no end to your iniquities." Now, we're going to pause our reading right there and say that we could agree with that thought, that according to the eyes of God, according to the sight of God, that all are sinners, all are sinful. St. Paul says in Romans chapter 3 that no one is righteous, no, not one. All have sinned and fallen short to the glory of God. And if that's where Eliphaz had stopped speaking about sin and righteousness, he would be absolutely correct. But in verse 6, he goes on to accuse Job of doing something specific that warrants the Lord's incredible wrath. He says, "You have exacted pledges of your brothers for nothing and stripped the naked of their clothing." So in these verses, Eliphaz makes a logical leap from the general sin, the sinful state, the sinful nature of all humanity. And then in verse 6, he accuses Job of particular sins that in his understanding, in his mind, would warrant the sort of suffering that Job is experiencing. And in this, he is wrong. My note on chapter 22, verses 5 and 6, it says, "While we are all equally sinners in God's sight, accusing Job of specific sin or wrong, or attributing his suffering to a particular sin is also wrong." And this is where we want to learn from Eliphaz not to leap to conclusions. If we see someone suffering and trying to come to a false correlation, a false cause and effect relationship between something that someone has done and the suffering that they are experiencing. Now, God has given us our earthly wisdom, and he has given us his 10 commandments. He's given us his will in the form of the law and the golden rule, so that we can see right and wrong. And when we see people doing wrong, we often see them experiencing consequences for the poor choices and the poor decisions that they've made. But this only works up to a certain point. And when people are suffering, especially someone like Job, who is suffering tremendously for apparently no good reason, it is easy for us of identifying a cause and effect relationship between a particular choice or a particular sin and the negative outcomes or the negative experiences that someone is having. And we don't want to fall into that trap of presumption. If assumption is the mother of all mistakes, we want to be very careful in this area, because Job's friends, who had supposedly come to console him, have at this point in the conversation been the absolute opposite of friends. They have been the opposite of kind or merciful in their judgment and assessment of his life and how it was that he was suffering and why it was that he was suffering. And we can inadvertently fall into the same trap. Yes, if someone has a habit of overindulgence with alcoholism and then experiences negative health effects after years or decades of such consumption, we can make an earthly correlation between a particular set of decisions or behaviors and the health outcomes that that person is experiencing. But we are always limited when it comes to these things. We can't look inside the human body to understand why things are happening the way that they are. And we live in a world where certainly alcoholism increases the risk for things like liver failure and sclerosis and pancreatic cancer and other cancers as well. But alcohol isn't the only cause of those diseases, because there are some people who are very healthy people, who are very young, who have never been known to drink too much, who are afflicted by the very same diseases. And oftentimes as people age, the reality is our bodies break down. They don't work the way that they're supposed to. And many times people often, I think, even sometimes not even realizing it, blame the person who is suffering for a disease by trying to come up with a false relationship. And this is no smarter, this is no more wise than Martin Luther and many people who lived 500 years ago, assuming a false relationship, a false correlation between magnetism and lemon juice. Because it is on the record, and it has been written down, that Luther believed that if you smeared lemon juice on a magnet, that it lost its magnetism. But this is patently false. So even though there are many people who we respect because of their wisdom and their understanding in certain areas of life, they are not always right in everything. And so where Eliphaz runs in here to condemn his friend Job for what he is experiencing, we want to stop. We want to pause. We want to give room for mercy and God's grace, so that when someone that we love is suffering, we can be a better friend than Eliphaz, not blaming the person for what they are experiencing, but rather walking with them, carrying their burdens, and sharing them with them, so that we can be a blessing to them instead of another burden and another obstacle to healing and grace. If you appreciate the faith and perspective of the Family Bible Journey, and you'd like to learn more about how I'm able to help congregations around the country and the world as they deal with the difficulties and the opportunities of ministry, go to the website of genesisgroup.com. That's GENYSYS-group.com. Or look for Genesis-Group on YouTube, where you can watch our videos and hear what other people are saying about our work. Our blessing for today. May you do good, not in hopes of earthly reward, but for goodness sake, knowing that the God who sees, knows, and will reward you with the fruit of righteousness that the world cannot take away. Amen.